Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Friday. How you doing? It's Friday, March 29th, 2019. Time for yet another show. Friday doesn't make a great deal of difference in this administration. They're all Fridays for Donald Trump. And one day melts into another, just like any other. The only differentiation I can see is the way we approach our show from day to day. And we're doing that differently, even today. We have a new visitor scheduled for the 10 o'clock hour today. So we'll get to that, of course, in about an hour, because it's the 9 o'clock hour right now. You see, this is the way time works. It's linear, kind of goes in a certain progression. You know how these things work. But we're live. We're ready to go. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Today, Kagro X welcomes, that's me, by the way, Aaron Kleinman, which is him, not me, Director of Research at futurenow.org. Thanks very much, Bill, for summing that up very professionally for us. Oh, and P.S., TGIF. Thank anybody you want. It's Friday regardless. I don't know if they had anything to do with it or not. But the big point is, it is Friday. You get the weekend off for the most part. Surely some of you work through the weekends. We all do a little bit to some extent these days. What with technology and all. Am I right, people? Okay, you're right. Enough with that. Anyway, what is the deal with airline food? Anybody? Okay, let's see. What do we got to get to work? Oh, yes, right. It's time for me first to click to please remind me tomorrow to get to know my Mac. Tomorrow will be a better day for it. Being Saturday, I won't be on the air. That I don't think I'll have turned on the Mac at that point either. But if I do, well, okay. At that point, I guess I'll get to know the new Mac. Thanks again to everybody who is donating to support the show. I remind you, Patreon, Patreon.com is the place to do that easily, sustainably. I mean, I say sustainable. It's sustainable for everybody else, I guess. But you can click it once and donate monthly from that point onward. And we do nicely there. We're hoping to do a bit better so that each new equipment crisis isn't such a frenzy of comparison shopping, perhaps. Though I think now we have minimized that. We know pretty much where the good prices are. But as I mentioned yesterday, it's time for kids to be financed on their way through college. And we'd like to make a going concern of this, and it would be extraordinarily helpful, in particular, if we had help with it. And those people who do help us with it now, help us with it for a pittance, and it would be nice to be able to change that. But we kind of have to scale up in order to do that. How do you do it? Well, just think briefly about the value of the show to you. Calculate it any way you like, but at current rate of things, well, our average monthly donation runs about $7, which is $20 less than the average donation to Bernie Sanders. So I'm a socialist hero, I think. I think that's what it means. Surely there's more to it than just the donation levels, though. $7 a month is our average donation. The amount of time that we put into the show and the amount of time we entertain you each week, or at least talk at you each week, and I guess it's a smaller number that we actually entertain you during those 2 hours daily, works out to about 17 cents an hour for your entertainment value. That can't be beat. I mean, it can be. Don't donate. But then I'll be beat, and eventually I'll stop. See, that's how it works. So anyway, I encourage you, if you haven't found your way to patreon.com, to please do so, and we can, make a living at doing this, which would be nice. I can't continue forever, I suppose. At some point, somebody's going to say you really have to do something more lucrative than this. And at the moment, I don't know. I'm not sure what that's going to be, so I suppose we could just depend on the difficulty of securing interesting and lucrative enough work all at the same time, and leave me free to take care of the kids all the time. But pretty soon they'll go to college, I think, for the most part anyway. We're pretty sure they're going to go, and we got to finalize that like next week or so. And then I won't have to do that so much. But then I don't know if the show continues at that point. All right, well, enough with that. it's time to move on. Ben Shapiro has threatened to have sex with a horse. I think that's probably top of the news this morning. I don't think he intended it to come out that way. I just happened to see this morning as I'm reviewing what was happening in the Hill, because everyone loves to review what's happening in the Hill. What just dropped? I don't know. Well, we'll look into that later on. Some mysterious item has dropped to the floor. I wonder what... Well, okay, it's distracting me, but I'll forget it for now. Unless it's the bolt holding this chair together, in which case I'll let you know, and you'll hear more things hit the floor. I don't know exactly what he was doing here. He's angry at The Economist for labeling him alt-right. And that makes him angry, and so he has decided at some forum or another to declare that the horse that they rode in on is in danger of sexual assault from him. So I don't know really why that has ever worked as a line, but apparently, I don't know. Idiomatic things are weird and difficult to explain. I did see somebody point out, however, maybe it wasn't correct to label him as alt-right. He's quite mainstream in his rightness. I mean, it's a position he takes. Well, never mind what positions he takes. Don't tell the horse. Anyway, he certainly takes political positions, let's say, that could easily cast him as alt-right. It's just that alt-right has kind of become mainstream right. So that's a point worth making as well. Let's see. There's a million other things we should catch up on. Let's check Pocket and make sure, that we've got at least some of them standing by, and remind me of all the things that I thought were important to share with you. We had a couple new entries in the you are really good at getting stuff done or whatever hashtag Dotard thread, which continues, I think, for about a year now. We might be coming up on a year since we first began this. 2 court losses on the Affordable Care Act front for Donald Trump. We've had several. And, why is this one displayed first? Let's get down to the bottom of this thread and see where we're going to. Where did we end up with this one? Yes, let's see. No, I feel like there's more here. But all right, well, I think I have to scroll some more to get this thing done. What is going on here? Why aren't the latest displayed first? Here we are. Judge blocks Trump Medicaid work requirements. After reading that story about work requirements for Medicaid in Arkansas, judge blocks Trump Medicaid work requirements in Arkansas and Kentucky. So that's of some interest there. Let's see. Is there anything in particular that we can pull out of this? Judge James Bosseberg of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, an Obama appointee, ruled Wednesday afternoon in 2 separate cases that the Trump administration didn't consider whether the work requirements met the objective of Medicaid, which is, of course, to provide coverage to needy populations. So I guess you can't just go ahead and take that away, even with work requirements, without someone stepping in and saying, hey, the intent of the law, that thing again, prohibits you from just waltzing in there and rewriting it at your every whim. So we have that one. And just before that, I think we had, there we are. Judge strikes down Trump rule allowing small businesses and individuals to create group health plans. I think the association health plans idea, that coming under attack here. This is Judge John Bates of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, blocking the rules which would allow small businesses and individuals to band together to create group health plans. Bates, in his ruling, called it a clear effort to avoid following the rules of the Affordable Care Act. The final rule is clearly an end run around the ACA. Bates, a George W. Bush appointee, said in a ruling, according to Bloomberg. So, hit on 2 fronts in his efforts to roll back the Affordable Care Act, even as he introduces his latest effort to undermine, destroy, repeal, maybe he pretends replace the Affordable Care Act. through even from renewed efforts in legislation. Whew. Okay. And not to mention continued attack on the regulatory front. Other stories, though, also circulating this morning and last evening, and things we need to catch up on in general. Let's see. Here's a new one. I wasn't aware of this effort until early this morning, being reported by Talking Points Memo, Nicole LaFond on this one. And this isn't, is this original reporting? Just checking. Sometimes it's difficult to tell with TPM, but here's the story. Bob Menendez and other Democrats on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, but he would be the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, has asked the State Department Inspector General, do they have one, or are they just an acting one? I'm not sure. And asked the Inspector General to investigate the State Department's handling of a journalism award meant to honor a Finnish journalist who was critical of President Trump. The headline here is Dems ask IG to probe State Department for canceling award for reporter critical of Trump. Sounds like it won't need to be a very in-depth investigation. He'll probably admit it to Lester Holt, but then Brit Hume will say he didn't, and then we'll have to have an investigation after that, I guess. According to a report released by Democrats on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, the State Department planned to give its International Women of Courage Award to Finnish journalist Jessica Aro, but abruptly withdrew the honor. The State Department has maintained that it errantly notified Aro that she was the recipient of the award. That is an interesting try at escaping. I assume the better explanation for what happened here is that somehow they found... I don't know why they decided to give her the award. I mean, it may be that somebody thought that was funny and ironic, or it may be that she's the most fantastic international journalist out there. But, how would I know? I don't take note of such things until they're reported. I'll take their word for it. She's great, but I wouldn't have known. But most likely the explanation was that word got back to Trump somehow about that. And I find it hard to believe that there are people who remember Jessica Aro being critical of Trump, unless... was that the one? Well, maybe we should read the story. There was a point at which I understand he had a bunch of foreign journalists in, and he singled out, wasn't it, a Finnish woman reporter? Maybe this was her, because she was attractive to him, I guess. And that probably offended her greatly. And, she professionally filed her story, but then later on, I guess, was critical. And Trump being Trump, I assume he assigns somebody every day to look for people in the press who say bad things about me and report them to me and keep a database of enemies so we can punish them later. And it looks like they did so. And, of course, the idea that the State Department is now forced to say, well, it was an accident. We meant to give the award to who? To who did you mistakenly, accidentally give the award away, take it away from them and give it to Jessica Aro? I'd love to know. A report compiled by Democratic staffers on the committee found that there were significant communications between Aro and the State Department leading up to the, quote, error. So we made a lot of mistakes. Internal communications reviewed by the committee show that at least 8 State Department officials approved the wording of the bio that was meant to accompany her award, and the department was in communications with Aro for several months to discuss the honor, her travel plans, and her itinerary while she was in Washington, D.C. This doesn't sound like a mistake at all. But 2 weeks after an official reportedly asked Aro for all her social media handles, she was notified that the offer of the award had been rescinded and she was no longer invited to attend the event. Aro had tweeted lighthearted jokes about President Trump in the past and once responded to one of Trump's tweets by suggesting the president was trolling on behalf of the Kremlin. Senate Democrats claim the timing is hardly a coincidence. If the department rescinded the award because of statements made by a journalist exercising her freedom of speech, it would mean that the department is using political fealty to the president as an eligibility criteria for receiving a government award designed to highlight courage. The letter from Senate Democrats to the State Department Inspector General Steve Linick said, furthermore, misleading the public and Congress about the true reasons behind its actions would harm the department's reputation here in the United States and around the world and undermine its credibility regarding future pronouncements from the press podium. Democrats who signed the letter include Menendez, Pat Leahy, Dick Durbin, Ben Cardin, Jeanne Shaheen, Chris Coons, Edward Markey, and Cory Booker. Very interesting. Based on, a press release and a release of the letter, all of this from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And no need to necessarily comb through all of that, but interesting and, par for the course. Just thought I'd add that to the pile, considering it's Friday. It's good for you to walk out of here with an armful of stories to discuss over the weekend. Let's see. Good story that I missed earlier, and or I saw it mentioned, but didn't find its way into the show. But thankfully, now we have a better view of it. Bruce McFarland sending along the story of the NRA's exporting, as he says, of gun nuttery to Oz, Australia. And he appends a tweet from the Giffords, are they a foundation? Giffords Courage. How do they define themselves by their, in their organizational chart here? You may have guessed, named after Gabby Giffords, founded by her, and a gun violence, anti-gun violence, or pro-gun safety organization, obviously. And let's take a look at their tweet. A reporter went undercover in a 3-year investigation and found out the NRA was teaching Australians to discredit gun violence survivors and advocates. Find out how the NRA exports fear abroad. And I have seen this piece circulated, and I think this is the very one about which I was thinking. I guess it being an undercover operation, it would be an exclusive, I guess, to Al Jazeera, which put this story together. Roger Mueller, who, you might not know, works for Al Jazeera. I didn't know, and you might not know that offhand because it doesn't sound like an Arabic name, but Al Jazeera publishes in English. That's how I'm able to bring it to you. So it's not that much of a surprise, is it? Not me, but Roger, went undercover to expose the U.S. Australia gun lobby, the U.S., Australia gun lobby. Al Jazeera reporter goes undercover in a 3-year investigation of the U.S.'s powerful gun lobby's strategies to promote firearms ownership. And I don't think it's going to even take us 1 year to read this piece, but it is rather lengthy. But I think we can get through it, and it'll help open your eyes, I guess, to how dangerous the pan-national gun rights movement actually can be, and chalk that up next to the pan-national white nationalist movement. The same people often moving in those circles, and I guess employing the same strategies. The reporter, Roger Mueller, again, begins this way. I've been living a double life for the past 3 years. As part of Al Jazeera's elaborate infiltration of the United States gun lobby, I assumed the role of a gun advocate, pretending to campaign for repeal of Australia's rigid gun control laws, and pretending that I wanted more firearms in the hands of Australian citizens. In fact, I disagree with all of those things. I believe the gun lobby's efforts to conceal the truth, which concerns public safety and constitutional rights, should be brought to light. And that's why I chose to take part in this undercover investigation. My involvement in the project began in 2015 when I received a call from Peter Charley. That's one person with 2 first names, but last name is Charlie Charley, in case you're interested. Peter Charley, the executive producer of Al Jazeera's investigative unit in Washington, D.C. Peter, Charlie, Joe, Frank, Bob explained that his team were investigating, that's European English for you, the U.S. gun lobby and its attempts to manage the messaging on whether more guns lead to more deaths. Of course, we got some interesting data on that yesterday. His team had gathered enough evidence of deliberate deception and were now considering staging an undercover operation. Charlie then got to the point. That would be Peter, Charlie. His idea was to create a pro-gun group in Australia that would, in theory, appeal to the NRA. He asked if I would be interested in posing as that group's founder and president in order to infiltrate the NRA, and if so, would I be comfortable wearing hidden cameras on frequent visits to the U.S. to cultivate lies with the NRA and to record my conversations with them? Sounds dangerous. It was an interesting idea. I'd never worn a hidden camera or claimed to love guns. In fact, I'd only fired a gun a few times on a friend's farm. That won't matter. Don't worry about it. I didn't know a Glock from a Luger, and I've never seen an assault rifle. That didn't matter, Charlie said. He was looking for someone with the ability to work with a room and knowledge of people, business, and finance. I would be trained thoroughly in journalistic requirements as well as handling guns. So I was in. Sounds like a triple life. In preparation for my assignment, Al Jazeera flew me to London. That was an interesting choice, where I was taught how to phrase questions and how to conduct myself as an undercover journalist. I was schooled by a concealed camera expert in the use of my tiny cameras, undetectable to the human eye. Wow. And they brought me to the U.S. and put me through gun safety courses and arms training. My new life as a gun enthusiast had begun. All I had to do now was convince the NRA that I was somebody I was not. And then you'd be paired up with Maria Butina. I guess at that point you'd be entitled to 1 free year of cohabitation with some Russian operative anyway. So you got really lucked into a good assignment there. The plan Charlie had devised was simple. Playing on the NRA's open contempt of Australia's strict firearms laws, he created a group called, you'll never guess, Gun Rights Australia, which claimed it was pushing for a repeal of the legislation. My job was to use this as a front to endear myself to NRA officials and climb as high as I could within the organization, recording conversations with them on subjects such as how they respond to a massacre, how they pressure members of the U.S. Congress, and how they manipulate the media. I took my first steps as a man with a double life at the 2016 NRA convention in Louisville, Kentucky. Camera operators and producers from Al Jazeera's investigative unit traveled with me from Washington, D.C. to Louisville and helped position the pinhead-sized camera lenses for my very first encounters with NRA officials. I was a little nervous at first. Don't worry about it. There's actually a no-gun policy inside the convention. But I soon relaxed into my new role as I made my way further into the gun lobby, the lobby of the gun lobby, in the hotel there, I guess. I began to understand the depths of some U.S. citizens' passion for their cherished Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. Don't forget about the militia part there. I mean, not that it's still operative. Those around me at the NRA convention wore hats, t-shirts, and badges declaring their undying love for the, quote, God-given right to carry a weapon. It became very clear to me that if I wanted to sound believable, I had to espouse those same passions. That was not easy. I am genuinely proud of Australia's gun control laws, and to rail against snowflakes and gun grabbers seemed like a betrayal of my friends and family back home, who I believe are safe because of such tough laws. Many of them were astonished at my newfound passion for firearms. I brushed most queries off, saying, "It's a scary world out there. I've realized that guns can keep us all safe, so I'm campaigning for more guns here." That must have been difficult. But not everyone was happy with such explanations. On more than one occasion, strangers who had seen the Gun Rights Australia website confronted me on the street and berated me for trying to drag Australia's gun laws in the directions of those in the U.S. That must have been an unpleasant experience. But at the NRA convention in Louisville, my claims to want Australia's laws repealed made people smile at me, shake my hand, and slap me on the back. At the end of each day's filming, Peter and his team would huddle in my hotel room, or in a hotel room, not necessarily in his, to review the videos I'd secretly filmed. Sometimes one of my cameras had pointed too high, and all I filmed was the ceiling. Over time, I learned how to capture the sort of footage Al Jazeera required. Over 3 years, I traveled from Australia to the U.S. numerous times to build connections with the pro-gun community. Some encounters were amusing, others utterly bizarre. At one gathering, an albino python was released onto a lawn and a tiger paced in a cage for the amusement of cocktail-sipping guests. That does sound bizarre. Guess what? There, he spoke to Donald Trump Jr., the son of the U.S. president, and an outspoken gun rights advocate. Wayne LaPierre, the NRA chief, applauded as my presence was announced by an MC. At another event, I fired shotguns at clay pigeons beside U.S. congressmen and posed for a photograph with Chris Cox, the chief lobbyist for the NRA. Bit by bit, I was gathering video, collecting conversations, and living a life I never thought possible. How glamorous. Then Charlie asked me to contact Pauline Hanson's One Nation, a far-right pro-gun Australian political party. Charlie wanted me to find out if any connections existed between One Nation and the U.S. gun lobby, and so began another chapter in my life as an avid gunner. When I approached One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and mentioned my NRA connections, he told me he wanted to visit the U.S. to meet them. I set up meetings in Washington, and soon Ashby and One Nation's Steve Dixon were on a flight to the U.S. I was there, ready to meet them, and our hidden cameras were all primed and ready to go. Now, there's an extensive continuation of this and lots of video and all this, and a separate story somewhere out there, I'll have to see if I can round it up, about the connections between this far-right pro-gun Australian political party and the man who perpetrated the massacre in New Zealand. Not surprising at all, I guess. We'll be back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've picked up some of the accompanying stories just to share a few of them with you, although I suspect that there are more out there. I don't know whether this one covers the angle I wanted, but Washington Post's reporting on this situation from earlier in the week. NRA videos show One Nation's nationalism is up for sale. Seems a little familiar. Every country has something of which it is particularly proud. In Australia, it's gun control, reports Richard Glover for the Washington Post. After a terrible massacre in 1996, a conservative government reacted with laws so tough. How tough were they? They led to the destruction of hundreds of thousands of guns. The laws have proved popular, and according to researchers, they have saved countless lives from both homicide and suicide. Enter the United States National Rifle Association. We want more homicide than suicide, they say. It doesn't say so in the story, but anyway, this week video emerged of senior officials from Australia's far-right political party, One Nation, discussing a $20 million donation from the gun lobby group. The goal was to water down Australia's gun laws and even its voting system. How interesting is that the NRA should have such a keen interest in watering down Australia's voting system? And really, honestly, I mean, I guess we should take a pause in this story just to shore up one particular point. What interest would the National Rifle Association have in rolling back Australia's gun laws, which have literally and by definition cannot have anything whatsoever to do with the rights of Americans to own guns in the United States. And the answer is, of course, we all know that it's not a gun rights lobbying group. It is a gun manufacturers lobbying group. The only interest the NRA could possibly have in Australian gun laws is in loosening them so that its member and constituent manufacturing organizations can make more money selling guns in more places. There's really no other explanation for it. All right, continuing with this story. In another video, One Nation officials meet with representatives from Koch Industries. Yes, the Koch brothers, Koch Industries, known for funding conservative causes. I don't think they make guns, but I guess they might move into that. Who knows? It's going to get down to money at the end of the day. One of the men says in the recording, we can change the voting system in our country, the way people operate, if we've got the money to do it. The videos came just days after the New Zealand massacre and the move to tighten its own gun laws in response to the Christchurch mass shooting. One Nation as a political party is hard to shame. Its leader, Pauline Hanson, has spent decades being mocked for her racist views, her ignorance of policy, even her stumbles with language. As with President Trump, the mockery has often served to merely strengthen her popularity. This time around, however, the criticism may be more dangerous. One Nation, after all, is a party that uses nationalism as a rallying cry. How does that rub up against a desire to be funded by a foreign organization? How does it sit alongside a pledge to change Australia's laws to better match those of a foreign power? They don't care. They're Gibbetarian there, too. We want to be in bed with the United States was one of the phrases used by One Nation representatives in the hidden camera video, recorded by an undercover reporter for Al Jazeera News Network. If we could get that amount of money, imagine, we could change Australia, says one of the men. The story generated a wave of rage from Australia's mainstream political parties. Prime Minister Scott Morrison accused One Nation of seeking, quote, to sell Australia's gun laws to the highest bidders, to a foreign buyer, and I find that abhorrent. The opposition leader, Bill Shorten, agreed, saying he was horrified by what he saw as a betrayal of Australia's political system. Morrison, in particular, can be forgiven for leaping on the revelations. He has an election fight in May, and One Nation looks set to bleed votes from his Liberal National Coalition, especially in the state of Queensland. Ever since One Nation emerged in the mid-1990s, it has provided a dilemma for Morrison's party. Do you move your own policies to the right to steal the party's ground, as was arguably done in the Tampa election of 2001? I don't know what that is referring to, but okay. Or do you attack One Nation directly, criticizing both its policies and party structure, as was done when Hanson was accused of electoral fraud? In 2003, she was imprisoned for 11 weeks before being released on appeal, but the imprisonment added to her reputation as a political outsider. This time around, in the wake of Christchurch, Morrison is under pressure to make absolute his disavowal of One Nation. Under Australia's system of preferential voting, political parties can advise voters on how to number their ballot papers. It's a tricky decision for Morrison. By placing One Nation last, he may deliver votes to his key rival, the Australian Labor Party. But failing to put One Nation last on how-to-vote cards will undercut his attack on a party he calls abhorrent. One Nation has attacked Al Jazeera, saying it was the victim of media entrapment by the Qatari broadcaster and accused its reporter of skullduggery. The two party operatives in the video, James Ashby and Steve Dixon, said they sought advice from the NRA. They were told to emphasize how women could use guns for self-protection, but say no money was supplied. When the video was recorded, they had merely had too much to drink. We'd arrived in America, said Ashby. We got on the sauce. We'd had a few drinks, and that's where those discussions took place. That was the excuse they were handing them, I guess. On Wednesday, I don't think, does anybody really believe that Australians came to the United States and people drank them under the table? I don't know. On Wednesday, Morrison responded tartly, being drunk is no excuse for trading away Australia's gun laws to foreign bidders. Will that convince One Nation's electoral cheer squad? It should. At very least, Hansen's voters need to consider whether she is just a pretend patriot, since her staffers seem willing to trade influence for foreign money. In November, Parliament passed new laws banning foreign donations from Australian politics. Hansen was enthusiastic, telling the Senate overseas money should not have an influence in our political scene, so I believe foreign donations should be stopped. She was speaking just 2 months after her lieutenants, as we now know, were in the United States dreaming of accessing the NRA's millions. And it must have been an interesting dream, because when they woke from it, they found out that the NRA was nearly bankrupt at the end. How interesting. What a shocking revelation that must have been. All right. Not immediately evident here, though. I thought there was more evidence of the connection between One Nation and the okay, maybe this article will take us a little bit closer to that, from the Sydney Morning Herald, from a little closer to the shooting back on March 18th. Pauline Hanson denies One Nation complicit in Christchurch massacre. It has been put to One Nation leader Pauline Hanson, writes Amy Coffrey of the Morning Herald, that her party's anti-Muslim rhetoric drives extremist attacks, such as the Christchurch massacre, in which the alleged Australian gunman killed 50 people praying in 2 mosques back, a few weeks ago. It was on Friday. Appearing on Channel 7's in Australia, Sunrise on Monday morning, on which she has been a longtime contributor, Hanson was asked by host David Koch. Yes, the host is David Koch. I don't know whether he pronounces his name Koch like they do here in the United States, but it's Koch. It could be Koch, like the mayor, but I don't know. She was asked by the host if she felt complicit in the deadliest mass shooting in New Zealand's modern history. And guess what? She probably said no. This terrorist manifesto almost reads like One Nation immigration and Muslim policy. Do you in any way feel complicit with this atrocity? He asked. Hanson was quick, of course, to reject the idea that she and her party should be held partly responsible for the attack. I feel for these people, she said. Oh, wonderful. I feel for the families that have lost lives. The same happened just across the road from here when you had the Lint Cafe massacre. We have problems, but you've actually got to discuss it and debate the issues. Why do we have terrorist attacks in this country? Why is it happening around the world? Most of the terrorist attacks are carried out by right-wing supremacists that are egged on by your comments and by your anti-Muslim comments, saying they don't deserve to be here, that they will take over this country, Koch or possibly Koch said. Not bad. Can you understand how that empowers a white supremacist into seeing it as a call to arms? That is a load of rubbish, Hanson responded. So, I don't know. Doesn't sound like it's a load of rubbish at all, does it? And if you're interested in the specifics of how he nails her down, we can continue with a little bit of that. Koch reminded Hanson of her second maiden speech in 2016, in which she claimed Australia was, quote, in danger of being swamped by Muslims, with its people living under Sharia law and treated as second-class citizens if urgent changes weren't made to immigration policies. She had also called for the burqa to be banned and the construction of mosques to be halted. The Queensland senator also said during the program on Monday that she would abstain from voting to censure former One Nation Party colleague Fraser Anning because it won't prove a damn thing. After the altercation, the words Koch and Sunrise started to trend on Twitter, but praise for the host's direct line of questioning quickly turned to scorn, with many highlighting Hanson's affiliations with Seven, which has continued since her appearance on the network's first season of Dancing with the Stars in October of 2004. Wow, so many parallels. Reality television is in on it all, the whole thing. All right, according to Media Watch, Hansen made 20 appearances on the show to speak about a range of news stories between September of 2015 and July of 2016 in the lead up to her re-election. In July of 2016, news.com.au reported that Hansen was paid for those appearances, with some questioning if the platform was the leg up needed to get back into Parliament. Michael Pell, Sunrise's executive producer, defended the network and its decision to give Hansen a regular platform, another parallel to our own problems. Pauline has always been paired on air with someone from the other side of the political spectrum to provide balance. In this case, crossbencher, as they call him, Darren Hinch. Or as the actual quote is, in this case, Darren. But who is Darren? It's Darren Hinch, and somebody from the other side, according to Pell. When necessary, the Sunrise hosts have taken her on, as David did this morning. We never shy away from debates. We canvass both sides, and viewers are left to make up their own minds. That's what democracy is. He also said that Hansen was not paid for her appearance, but Sunrise does make a small donation to her chosen charity. Slight difference there, but well worth noting. Boy, the problems here seem to replicate themselves around the world. Sorry, Australia, if we had, anything to do with that. All right, following up with another story we have spent some time on here here on the show. CNBC, I am alerted, reporting or passing on the report from Reuters anyway. I have seen a little bit about this. We'll have to see what emerges over the weekend, see if we can clear things up. Trump administration approves secret nuclear power work for Saudi-owned Arabia. Yeah, they don't use the word Saudi-owned, of course, but that's our own. A couple of bullet points up here before the Reuters story runs. It's not CNBC's own original work. Energy Secretary Rick Perry has approved 6 secret authorizations by companies to sell nuclear power technology and assistance to Saudi-owned Arabia, according to Reuters. The Trump administration has quietly pursued a wider deal on sharing U.S. nuclear power technology with Saudi-owned Arabia, which aims to build at least 2 nuclear power plants. Several countries, including the United States, South Korea, and Russia, are in competition for that deal, and the winners are expected to be announced later this year by Saudi-owned Arabia. How exciting. There's a little contest going on. Maybe we'll win the rose. But yeah, how about that? Rick Perry apparently already approved 6 secret authorizations by companies to sell nuclear power technology and assistance to Saudi Arabia, according to a copy of a document seen by Reuters on Wednesday. Well, I always do say you should ask for the paperwork. The Trump administration has quietly, not that quietly really, pursued a wider deal on sharing U.S. nuclear power technology with Saudi Arabia, which aims to build at least 2 nuclear power plants. Several countries, including the United States, South Korea, and Russia, are in competition for that deal, as mentioned in the bullet points above. Perry's approvals, known as Part 810 authorizations, allow companies to do preliminary work on nuclear power ahead of the deal, but not ship equipment that would go into a plant, a source with knowledge of the agreement said on condition of anonymity. The approvals were first reported by the Daily Beast, and I do believe I have the Daily Beast's piece around here somewhere. The Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA, said in the document that the companies had requested that the Trump administration keep the approvals secret. And we agreed to this? Of course. Well, this administration certainly would. How weird is that? In this case, each of the companies which received a specific authorization for Saudi-owned Arabia have provided us with written requests that their authorization be withheld from public release, the NNSA said in the document, because they're so proud of their merely commercial interactions. We're engaged in trade with an ally. What's the big deal? Don't tell anybody. The NNSA and the Department of Energy did not immediately respond to requests for comments. Many U.S. lawmakers are concerned that sharing nuclear technology with Saudi Arabia could eventually lead to a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Really? Wow. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told CBS last year that the kingdom would develop nuclear weapons if its rival Iran did. That'll help things. In addition, the kingdom has occasionally pushed back against agreeing to U.S. standards that would block two paths to potentially making fissile material for nuclear weapons clandestinely: enriching uranium and reprocessing spent fuel. Guess what they're going to be doing with the fuel that they use after they're done with it in these nuclear power plants? Gee whiz, I don't know. We had a whole rigmarole we went through when we found out that Iran was attempting the same thing, and now we will sell the ability to do it to Saudi Arabia. What a great idea. That won't come back to haunt anyone. Concern in Congress about sharing nuclear technology and knowledge with Saudi Arabia rose after October 2nd, 2018, when a U.S.-based journalist, you maybe heard of him, Jamal Khashoggi, was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Part 810 authorizations were made after November of 2017, but it was not clear from the document whether any of them were made after Khashoggi's killing. Interesting. They could have just said that a little clearer, I think, but we get the idea now. Representative Brad Sherman of California called on Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during a congressional hearing on Wednesday to release the names of the companies that got the approvals by the middle of April. And Pompeo said he would look into it. Guess what's happening? Sherman also said the Trump administration has attempted to evade Congress on sharing nuclear power with the kingdom. Pompeo said the administration was working to ensure any shared technology nuclear power would not present proliferation risks. That was an awkwardly phrased sentence, but I actually think I read it correctly. Last month, Democratic House members alleged in a report that top White House aides ignored warnings that they could be breaking the law as they worked with former U.S. officials in a group called IP3 International to advance a multi-billion-dollar plan to build nuclear reactors in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. IP3 did not immediately respond to a request for comment about whether it was one of the companies that got a Part 810 authorization. Separately, the Government Accountability Office, the investigative arm of Congress, has accepted a request by Senators Marco Rubio, a Republican, and Bob Menendez, a Democrat, to probe the administration's talks on nuclear deal with Saudi. A GAO official who spoke on a condition of anonymity said on Wednesday. So yet another investigation of the Trump administration, and yet another place in which the investigation will come around to the weird proclivity the Trump people seem to have for making sure that nuclear technology makes its way into the hands of the Sauds who own Saudi Arabia. Very smart. Sounds like you're really on the ball there and helping us out internationally. Thanks so much. Okay, let's see. Other items that we can include while we wrap up our first hour. Yes, well, certainly plenty of discussion of this one. Let me go to, should I go with the Washington Post version or we're Daily Coast Radio. Let's go with the Daily Coast version. Hunter happens to be the one who covered this Washington Post story for us. Trump documents to banks and insurers contained clearly fraudulent information. You would almost certainly have seen this story, of course, because it appeared on the front page at Daily Coast. But just for the record, it's a David Farenthold, David Farenthold piece. I know he's involved with it. I think he shares the byline on that one. There we are, yes, with Jonathan O'Connell. And let's see. Hunter summarizes it thus. The Washington Post has obtained some of the documents that investigators have been looking into to determine if Donald Trump acted to mislead potential lenders about his true net worth. Of course he did, but I suppose you want to be able to prove it rather than just assert it, even though you're right. Let's see. The accusation was made, pointedly, by longtime Trump attorney Michael Cohen in his public testimony before Congress. And some of those documents, Trump's statements of financial condition, as he called them, provided to banks and insurers, are astonishing. Some bullet points taken from the Post's work here. Trump lied about the number of floors in Trump Tower, claiming it had 68 floors rather than 58. Trump lied about the size of his 1,200-acre Virginia vineyard, claiming it was 2,000 acres, or almost double its true size. Trump lied about the number of lots he had zoned and ready for sale at his Southern California golf course, claiming 24 lots that did not exist. And as I recall from reading through part of the story, he was valuing them at $3 million apiece, so some $70 million in phantom assets that nobody ever called him on. These are, obviously not wee little oopsies. Of course, he'll say they are. Or what's the big deal even if they're huge, right? We're not on trial here yet. While a slightly less insane real estate developer might regularly overestimate the expected sale price of properties, for example, by claiming a property is almost twice as large as it actually is, or claiming your signature tower has sprouted 10 more floors overnight, would appear to be the sort of thing that would get any other developer thrown in prison. But there somehow seems to be some debate in the Post's article as to whether or not this counts as true financial fraud. To be sure, he outright lied to financial firms about his holdings in an effort to secure more favorable terms, which would seem to be the only needed definition, but there's some tittering over whether the lies are so egregious that they perhaps, or perhaps not, meant to be taken seriously or something. Very interesting. Yeah, they do make that point. Like, no real estate person would ever believe the things Donald Trump had to say about his holdings, but I don't know why not. This continues the apparent pattern in which any investigation of Donald Trump for anything turns up additional evidence of more potential crimes. And you can be absolutely assured that the newly Democratic-run House will be examining every one of these bizarre documents. And I have no doubt that they will be. I just have doubts about where they'll go with them and what they'll be able to do with them before they run into the roadblock of wringing their hands and saying, we're not entirely sure whether we can do anything here. Very interesting. And the longer, more detailed piece from David Farenthold and Jonathan O'Connell in the Washington Post is indeed fascinating. I haven't made it all the way through the piece because I don't make it all the way through anything ever. But definitely interesting and well worth the time in combing through, although I don't know that we have the time, as a matter of fact, to get to that today. Let me see if there are a few more things we can include basic information on and give you to read over the weekend before taking our top of the hour break and then having Aaron Kleinman join us. Let's see. Yeah, here's an interesting one. Why don't we share this? I don't know if we can get all the way through this one or not, but Lupe Lupin, or NYC Southpaw, which is a lot easier to say but sounds funnier, on Twitter, has this piece for Yahoo News, as you know, quite the legal analyst. In pursuit of Mueller's grand jury materials, Democrats face an impeachment dilemma. This is an interesting point, I think, well constructed. Let's take a look. In the aftermath of the special counsel's investigation, Washington is girding for a conflict between Capitol Hill and the Department of Justice over Congress's and the public's access to the contents of special counsel Robert Mueller's report and the evidence collected by his investigation, including the grand jury evidence. However, there is a complication that neither congressional Democrats nor the Department of Justice appear ready to acknowledge or discuss. They may know about it, but they don't acknowledge or discuss it. The strength of the legal authority supporting lawmakers' demand for grand jury evidence depends, in part, on whether those materials are sought in connection with an impeachment inquiry, something party leaders have publicly disavowed. I'm not for impeachment, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said in a Washington Post magazine interview earlier this month. Impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country and he's just not worth it. You remember that statement. The battle over grand jury material was already alluded to in Attorney General William Barr's letter to Congress on Sunday, in which he noted the special counsel's report contains grand jury evidence that would be kept under wraps, citing the general procedural rule governing secrecy of those proceedings. The heads of the congressional investigating committees in response have signaled that they expect Mueller's entire report and everything that he gathered, including the grand jury materials, to be turned over. In their reply to Barr, the committee chairs noted, without going into detail, that there's legal authority for the release of grand jury materials to Congress under similar circumstances. The Democratic House and Senate staff have confirmed that they want that evidence. We expect the grand jury materials. Shadon, is that his name? Reddick Smith, a spokesman for the House Judiciary Chairman Gerald Nadler, said. A spokesman for Senate Judiciary Ranking Member Dianne Feinstein, Tom Mentzer, added that Democrats' call for the Mueller report and underlying evidence would certainly include the grand jury materials, but that means Democrats leading the House investigative committees will have to convince the Department of Justice that turning over grand jury materials to Congress is permissible, or go to court to compel the production of those materials. And you know what that can mean. If Democrats frame their requests as preliminary to a potential impeachment proceeding, they would likely be on stronger legal footing because it would make an exception to the general rule of grand jury secrecy available to them, one that likely would not be available for a simple oversight request. However, adopting that stronger legal position to obtain investigative materials would run the risk of contradicting the political messaging of Democratic leaders, including Pelosi, who have sought to take impeachment off the table. House and Senate Democrats declined to answer questions about the specifics of this precedent and whether it may be influenced by impeachment. The Department of Justice, likewise, did not respond to repeated requests for comment. Very interesting. Poses a dilemma, yes. They may have to fess up that they'd be interested in this after all just to get that material. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We attempting to get connected with Aaron Kleinman, as promised in our second hour. Aaron, are you on? I suspect that you are, but the connection is not working. We don't seem to hear you for whatever reason. You know, let's disconnect and give the call another try. Oh, you know what? My equipment indicates you may have your mute button on, Aaron. You want to check that? Okay. Or check your... This is unfortunate. Okay, well, there we are.
Is this any better?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is.
Oh, the thrill of live radio. Hello,
yes.
everyone.
Although we got quite an echo on your... You're not in a open auditorium, are you?
No, I'm in a little conference room,
okay.
But I put on my headphones. Hopefully, is this a little better?
Yes, that'll help a little bit.
All right, great.
Okay, great. Okay, well, all right, there we are. Good to have you with us. You know, we do these things live, and it's okay. It keeps things casual.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so Aaron, I was telling everybody up at the top of the show, you are, you specialize in a very particular kind of information, if I understand things correctly, for your work for futurenow.org. And as it's explained to me, part of your role as director of research is you are essentially finding the stories about exceptionally crazy state-level politicians, usually legislators, I would guess, that don't often make national headlines. This is it's something we've discovered over and over, just in our own reading of stories over the years, that the most exceptionally crazy politicians in America are often on the state or local level, and I think they assume that they'll continue to get away with their craziness because they're not in a national spotlight. But every once in a while, one of them will break through with their crazy and finally, I guess, get some accountability for it, which I've always thought was an extraordinarily important project. Just, who has the time to do these things? And I guess the answer is, well, let's find some people who do and you're one of them. Do I have that as explanation correct? Is that actually your mission at Future Now?
No,
or
well,
part of
not
it?
quite.
Okay.
It's part of it. Future Now is an organization that's dedicated to improving state governance nationwide by focusing on improving state legislatures nationwide.
Okay.
We have a policy platform that was developed with the help of Jeffrey Sachs, the UN sustainability expert and Columbia professor, who has spent his career looking at developing countries and coming up with plans for them to grow sustainable economies and become better places for their citizens to live. Unfortunately, in the United States, we could use some of his help. So we have a policy platform with 7 planks at americasgoals.org. I think in modern U.S. politics, it's considered a progressive platform. Things like having everyone gets access to clean water, and we improve life expectancy, and people get to participate in democracy. Ideally, these would be things that would, transcend partisanship, but right now they don't appear to.
No, I guess not.
So anyway, in my role as the director of research, I have to look at places where we really can improve the quality of state legislators across the country.
Okay.
And now that we have one party that's really racked by conspiracy, authoritarianism, and bigotry, there's a lot of room for improvement when they run candidates who believe in those things.
Well, that explains things, and that's a much nicer explanation, certainly. The idea of promoting better, more open and transparent democracy. It just so happens that some of your work is about exposing people who are rabidly opposed to such what should be an otherwise nonpartisan or agenda of democracy expansion. It seems to come from the same party fairly frequently, and that's just where the chips fall, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, and
fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a strict partisan. I mean, there are certainly Democrats that we couldn't support because they don't align with our goals.
Oh, absolutely.
And I hope. We hope that if the Republican Party kind of can modernize in any way and kind of shake the issues that are facing it, we would love to talk to them about how they can support our platform.
Okay,
but
it's just not happening.
I don't have a lot of hope for that happening anytime soon. But surprise me, guys! Surprise me.
The door is always open.
My door is open.
Okay. So I happen to see now. I should let everybody know, I guess, that you personally can be found on Twitter as it's Bobby Big Wheel, right?
Yeah, it's an old hockey nickname that I started using in 2008. Not knowing that I would eventually leverage this into a political career.
Well, it happens fairly frequently. I did the same
Kagro
thing. Yeah. And then I had successfully shed the whole thing, and then Armando said, "Hey, why don't you call your radio program Kagro in the morning?" And I said, "Okay, sure." And then I realized there would be people coming in who would have no idea what that means. But yeah, I guess I saddled myself with that too.
Yeah. Well, back in the Federalist Papers, they all had pseudonyms too. Exactly. So there's really no difference between you and me and Alexander Hamilton and James
I don't
Madison.
think so. And I'm looking forward to the Broadway production.
Yeah, if anyone out there wants to do a hip hop musical about our lives, you are more than welcome to. But you'll have to contact my lawyers about the life rights.
Okay. Well, that's available. Again, you can find him as Bobby Big Wheel on Twitter if you need to, and on Daily Kos as well. So no surprise there. And as a matter of fact, so I've got your latest diary from Daily Kos, which is an example of this thing, which is not your mission, but just happens to crop up an awful lot in your line of work and probably in your personal interests as well, I would guess. And this one is the piece, support a Democrat in a critical special election running against a Pizzagate conspiracy theorist. Are there Pizzagate conspiracy theorists running for office? What?
Yeah. Well, at least one, and I would bet more.
I would guess so.
Yeah, and so just as background on this, there was in the Pennsylvania House, which it has 203 seats in the Pennsylvania State House. If Democrats can flip 9 of them in 2020, they can retake the chamber and combine that with the state Senate as well, which they have a shot of retaking. Democrats could control the Pennsylvania government for the first time in decades. Because the governor's a Democrat as well, and so it's a really exciting opportunity. But right before Election Day, a Democrat in a Scranton area seat that had actually supported Trump by 8% died suddenly, and so there needed to be a special election to fill his seat. Democrats nominated a local nurse named Bridget Malloy Kozarowski. She came, sure, her family had kind of had issues. Her son had childhood cancer, and her family had issues with health insurance, and she was really running on improving health care for people in her district, which is we think is a great platform to run on. And she's running against a man named Frank Scavo, who was on a local school board and had run for office before, and he seemed to be pretty conservative, very into Trump. And so we started doing a little digging through his Facebook page. And keep in mind, these are all public Facebook posts. We didn't have to do like the Mossad-style black ops that the New Yorker sensationalizes. I was just kind of going through a Facebook feed. And we found that he, very anti-Muslim, a lot of bigotry. For a school board member, he couldn't really spell, which was kind of concerning. Also, he thought child abuse is pretty funny. But then we found posts that really showed that he seemed to believe that the Clintons ran a child sex trafficking ring outside the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor.
All right. We have heard this story before. So he was just one of many adherents to this crazy story that, still persists even after a gunman showed up some months ago and shot up the place, insisting that he wanted to find this basement operation, which doesn't exist, and neither does its basement, as it turns out. So, persisting in this months after people are being arrested for endangering the lives of everybody in the neighborhood over this insane falsehood. That's a good find. Is it having an impact locally?
We found that back in February, and we went out with it, and we were able to get a lot of, media coverage kind of bubbled up here and there. At first it was, we just kind of got more left-leaning outlets really kind of picked up the story. The Penn Capital Star, which is a great source for Pennsylvania politics for anyone interested in that, I recommend you check it out. They were one of the first groups to kind of pick up that Scavo believed some really crazy things, and eventually got to the local papers out there. Thankfully, there are in Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, you have pretty active media companies that still can cover local politics, and it really kind of ended up dominating the race. When this post came to light, Scavo was actually removed from the school board he sat on. And that was the Friday before the election. And the election ended up really being dominated by the fact that he really believed this terrible stuff. And so, election day came around. Keep in mind, this is a seat that Trump won by 8. The best we'd really seen a Democrat do there in 2018 was the governor who won a landslide statewide, Tom Wolf. He won the district by about 20 points. So we thought, okay, that's like the best case scenario. But now Representative Kozarowski ended up winning by 25 points, which was in a district that Trump won by 8. And it was absolutely, it's like, we were like, oh my God, how did that happen? And we looked a little bit at the numbers, at the raw vote totals. And so we thought in this special, all right, she'll need around, we figured Scavo would get around 5,500 to 6,000 votes. So she'll need to get more than that to win. And her campaign got 6,700 votes, which is, a great job on there. They really got their people out, and would have been enough. I think it would have been enough to win, maybe, but by pretty tightly if this story hadn't come to light. Scavo, we thought he'd get 5,500, 6,000 votes. He only got 4,000 votes. Republicans, kind of what I call weak Republicans, the people who, prior to 2016 were Republican but don't really like Trump right now, they just stayed home. And I think it shows you that when you tell people what these Republican candidates believe, it's a winning strategy.
Yeah.
I think that, you can't just willy-nilly tie these people to Trump, because people know in their heads that not every Republican is Trump, even though they, support him by, just kind of keeping,
right.
They essentially launder the party label by trying to seem normal and stable. But, we're increasingly seeing that Republicans are drawing their candidates from the ranks of people who really do love Trump, really think what he thinks, and, kind of, as you could see with his Grand Rapids rally, for existence, there are all of these, for example, there are all these people with, QAnon signs, another similar conspiracy theory. And just this is what the Republican Party is becoming right now. People who believe in insane conspiracies, who kind of worship Trump as almost a god emperor. And when you are faced with a Republican candidate who thinks those things, if you point out to voters that they do that, the majority of people don't want that. And even in a district that might have supported Trump, they'll vote against them.
Well, it's certainly worked here, and I'm sure can be replicated elsewhere, and particularly, I think, in those state level races where just the total number of votes cast in any given contest is relatively low, and it feels like the impact of work like yours in disseminating this information is magnified in ways that might not always carry the day, say, in a congressional district, across an entire congressional district, where you're talking about 6,700 votes for the winning candidate, 4,000 or so for the losing candidate. It seems like a realistic possibility to change the outcome of races.
Yeah, I mean, in the future now, I think our message to everyone is your effort, via volunteering or donations, however you want to contribute to progressive causes, is best expended on the state level, because that's where you can have the most difference. I'm just some guy sitting at a computer, and I was able to find this thing that really had a major impact on a state legislative race in a way that it wouldn't have for a congressional race or Senate race or presidential race. If you look to the state, and then also because I think national groups tend to neglect state level races or only really see them through the prism of helping out with redistricting. We miss a lot of opportunities to really get very unfit people out of office. And I think the decline, and something that you touched on as well, the decline of local media means that candidates are just so much more often, it's hard for them to differentiate themselves from the national party, which can work in our favor as well, especially in suburban areas that are trending toward Democrats. Republicans that, I have very little sympathy for any Republican that remains one during the age of Trump, but
Yes, sure.
Republicans who had developed years of effort in cultivating a moderate persona get washed away when races get nationalized. But also you have really very talented, hardworking Democrats in areas that are leaning conservative and don't have as many good news outlets. It's just a lot more difficult for them to differentiate themselves. And so, if we can kind of pay attention to places like that where maybe they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, but they'll vote for other Democrats. Think about ways that we can really support Democrats in those areas. And again, with a little effort goes a long way in these races.
Yes. And I guess they're also in many cases lower dollar races as well. And
they are.
Your funding can go further. And but yeah, especially in places where control of the legislature is tightly divided, and control can change with just a few elections swinging the other way. There's an enormous impact from that. There's in addition to just the policy implications of putting Democrats in control. The political implications, if for whatever reason you can't focus on anything but the national, one, as you mentioned, there is the redistricting issue, and two, this is the bench from which the next generation of often congressional, sometimes senatorial, gubernatorial candidates come. The state level elected officials looking to step up. The more of them you have, of course, the more of them you have available to compete strongly at the next level. But they have a much better platform on which to run if they have moved up as part of a majority. They have a legislative agenda, legislative accomplishments behind them, and of course, quality of life improves in the state. I tend to believe when it's governed that way.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that really kind of concerns me a little bit is no matter how 2020, say Democrats win in 2020, they still need to govern well, because there's U.S. politics is always cyclical. And my fear is that if Democrats don't govern well, even in spite of their best efforts, they're hampered, especially at the state level, where you saw, especially during the Obama era, a lot of kind of Republican-controlled states really robbed people of some of the benefits of Obamacare, for example. I think,
yes.
Like in Wisconsin, for example, you can kind of see backsliding come very easily. And the last thing that we want to do is pave the way for a competent Trump to come in during when U.S. politics goes through another cycle. And so, if you really are concerned about, Democrats governing well and becoming a governing party, you need to make sure that state legislatures are in the hands of competent people.
Yes, well, certainly always a good idea to have them in the hands of competent people, but politically speaking, in this case, quite right, and possibly a good answer to, among others, to the Republicans' march towards packing the entire federal judiciary with people they'll leave behind, even if we are once and for all rid of Trump. And one way, I guess, to push back on all of that is similar to the way you mentioned Republicans did, that they could resist the Obama platform, the Obama policy platform at the state level. It's a little bit different dynamic, but certainly controlling more state legislatures and I assume in many cases thereby taking control also of at least some portion of the state judiciary there. We got plenty of work to do to fight back on the federal judicial level, but don't neglect the states. It's been a big mistake. Democrats as a party have done that for a long time. Republicans have, at least in the past, had flashes and sometimes sustained flashes of paying real attention to their state and local politicians for that very reason, for building a farm team, or as they used to call them way back in the day, they're stealth candidates that they used to run for, even for supposedly nonpartisan positions locally, who were hardened Republican partisans, with the idea of moving them up the chain too. They've been better at it. And,
I mean, if you look at kind of the anti-tax hardliner movement, that was something that really started at the state level, where groups like ALEC and the Koch brothers were able to focus a lot of resources. They unfortunately recognized earlier on that you got a good return on investment for corruption at the state level, and that's where those forces really were able to corral special interests to really take over state legislatures. We are trying to return state legislators to the people, away from special interests, and that's our mission is to basically undo all the damage that groups like that have wrought. And you also brought up a really good point with the federal judiciary, because frequently they are going to find that acts of Congress and regulators are unconstitutional on dubious grounds, kind of a return to the Lochner era in U.S. jurisprudence for anyone out there who, like me, is a recovering attorney. And if you look at the Lochner era, a lot of kind of the precursors to the New Deal actually took place in New York State. And then FDR was able to kind of bring them nationally, get a court that kind of came to its senses. And then, we were able to usher in, really a robust welfare state that improved the lives of millions of Americans. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And if we are going to enter into another Lochner era on the federal judicial level, we need to make sure that states are prepared to improve the lives of their citizens, because the courts will hamstring our federal government from doing so.
Yeah. Well, that's one area in which we can fight back then. I noticed there was another story also out of the Pennsylvania State House the last couple of days. The Stephanie, was it Borowicz?
Borowicz. I think it's Borowicz.
Yeah.
I'm not too concerned with respecting her, even though I'd like to get people's names right, but go on.
Yeah, it's all right. Well, I mean, just we discussed the story a few days ago, I guess, or a day or two ago when it first broke. So she was giving this invocation at the beginning of the day's legislative session. And I don't know whether that's a common thing in Pennsylvania to have members give the invocation. I don't see it very often in Congress or ever, because they have a chaplain as the default person, but offended everybody by offering this particularly strident Christian prayer. But as it happens, just before swearing in the first Muslim member, or at least the first woman Muslim member, as far as I'm aware, in the Pennsylvania legislature. And that one, another example of something that actually made it to the national level. But it's a rare thing, but to make it there, but not a rare thing to find crazies like that in the state legislature.
No, and if you're listening to this show from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, keep in mind that she would not have been able to really, it was incredibly rude and disrespectful. I mean, yeah. There was no real material harm the way that we normally think of material harms coming about in politics. It was just incredibly rude to any Muslim resident of the state of Pennsylvania that their first ever female state representative would be sworn in after a woman constantly praised Jesus Christ for bringing us Donald Trump and supporting the state of Israel.
It offended everybody.
I mean, certainly people can say those things, but not in the context of a prayer to open up a session.
Yeah.
And so, she represents a very Republican seat in the middle of the state. But there are 41 Republicans in the Pennsylvania House who sit in seats that Governor Wolf won when he was reelected. And if you're thinking about a way to prevent kind of this disrespect to a state's citizens from happening again, is to really look at, near you, what is the nearest race where Tom Wolf won that district that's represented by a Republican. Maybe you could get involved. Maybe you could run. Pennsylvania state house districts, you represent about 60,000 people. So it's it is kind of an entry level. Candidates can run for these pretty easily. So it's something to think about.
Yeah. I would guess so. And I mean, even if she comes from a heavily Republican district, there may not be much you can do to be rid of her unless the Republicans take care of that themselves. But you can render her nullity by taking the majority away.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what happened in the U.S. House with Steve King. He became a lot less relevant once he was in the minority.
Yes.
Republicans were only willing to speak against him after he was reelected. And I suspect it'll be the same thing because, largely speaking, if you're a Republican in the year 2019, politically you have very little courage, and you're not willing to speak out on stuff like this.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that makes for a great way to focus on it. How can people tell them the website again so that they can get involved?
There's so many websites.
Okay, right. List them all. Let's do it.
It's futurenow.org is Future Now and Future Now Fund. That is our website. You should check it out. We were able to help flip two state legislatures and improve 4 more in 2017 and 2018. We're working on 2019 and 2020 now. Check out americasgoals.org for our policy platform. And if anyone here is listening to this from a state legislature, we actually work with state legislators to craft bills that reflect our policy platform. We are a full-service organization. Of course, you can check me out on Twitter at Bobby Bigwheel.
Yes.
Again, I didn't think that I would be on this radio show 10 years ago when I came up with it. That's okay. And yeah, that's where everyone can find me. And obviously, feel free to drop me an email at aaron@futurenow.org if you want to talk. I love talking elections. So
okay.
Feel free to drop me a line.
Well, that's highly recommended. Thanks for joining us here for this segment. We'll be back in 2 minutes, and we'll see what we move on to next.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Pardon me. Okay, I've got a tweet here from Michael Musson, and for whatever reason, it's having some difficulty sending out a response. So I'm hopeful that all connections are still stable, and we're still streaming as usual. But I noticed he had mentioned in the discussion of One Nation, the party in Australia, that there was an interesting parallel, that the NRA is accused of helping Putin water down U.S. elections, and now accused of helping One Nation water down Aussie elections. Now we need to link One Nation and Putin to come full circle. Seems like certainly a good point, and well worth pursuing. We'll see if we can't get to that. Hang on, as a matter of fact, hold on, let me do a little Googling. And I had a feeling that we'd come up with that suggestion. I just thought I'd Google One Nation, Australia, Putin, and see what we come up with. Here we are. Let's see. Shall we start up at the top? The Guardian has a piece here entitled, Pauline Hanson says Australians want Vladimir Putin's style of leadership. One Nation leader backs penalty rate cuts and likens government's vaccination program to a dictatorship. Yes, and thanks, Scott, for giving me thumbs up on sound here. Don't know why Twitter is hanging up. Not always an indicator of all these, there's systemic problems, but just wondering. Okay, so that gives us some basis for believing that perhaps there is a connection. I mean, I don't know why anyone in Australian politics would wander out into the wilderness, into the outback, if you will, and insist that Australians were clamoring for Vladimir Putin-style leadership. But Gabrielle, I'm not sure how she pronounces, Gabrielle Chan at The Guardian, thinks she's got the case here. Pauline Hanson has backed penalty rate cuts. I'm not exactly certain what we're talking about there, but reasserted her respect for Vladimir Putin, which is always an odd thing to do, and described successive governments' vaccination policies as blackmail. That's just weirdness creeping in through the back door, I think. One Nation leader asked for proof of Russian involvement in the downing of Flight MH17, which killed 298 people, including 38 Australians. This, by the way, back in March of 2017, this piece. Answering, did he push the button, she said. My comments were, I respect the man. He's very patriotic towards his country. The people love him. He's doing so well for the country. So many Australians here want that leadership here in Australia. I don't think that that's true. But I guess he's cleared from the downing of MH17 because he didn't push the button, whatever that means, by himself. The Labour leader tweeted, Bill Shorten immediately condemned Hansen's support of Putin. That's the Labour leader we're talking about. Immediately tweeting, 37 Australians died on MH17. Putin should not be admired by anyone. I don't think we need to read the rest of the article necessarily to know that Putin shouldn't be admired by anyone. But an odd thing for an Australian fringe party personality to both, for one thing, be anti-vax, two, be so rabidly pro-gun that she was interested in seeking major infusion of NRA cash to change the electoral system in Australia to do something about it. And then three, just also sort of have this inexplicable admiration for Vladimir Putin's style of leadership of anybody that's out there. Let's see. There's more, of course. And I guess I should start. I guess I'll save some of these and then mark them and come back later. But I wanted to go back to that Google search of it. There's Pauline Hanson praises killer Vladimir Putin and would be honored to be PM one day, as she offers to Tom McElroy from the Sydney Morning Herald back in February of 2017. More of the same here from about the same time. Look at this. How about this? Right around the same time, Putin moves to distance himself from Pauline Hanson. How do you like that? From an outlet called The Shovel, theshovel.com.au. I'm not certain exactly what we're looking at here, but Putin moves to distance himself from Pauline Hanson. Is that real, or is that like a satire site? Let's take a look and just see. It's a short little blurb here. My guess is no. He had no comment on her whatsoever, but thought this was response to her having invoked him as a subject of admiration. And I thought, it looks like they take this to be a joke, although I really have no idea whether that's possible that he may even have heard of her. But okay. Well, it actually says a quickly issued statement from the Kremlin confirmed that the two had never met and had nothing in common. I mean, I don't know why he would bother disavowing support from her. So I don't know. My guess is, I don't know. I don't know what to guess for you. Could be real, could be fake, could be satire. You can't even tell in this day and age. My goodness. All right, moving on. There's some more here. Let's see. Moving into April of 2017, the Russians are coming to help the alt-right make Australia, what can you guess? Great again. That's right. And it's even illustrated with a picture of somebody wearing a very stupid-looking Make Australia Great Again hat, red with the white lettering, styled after Trump's very stupid-looking hats. Ross Jones writing for the Independent Australia under this very provocative headline. Team Trump's collusion with the Russians in the U.S. election, this would be the subheader. Team Trump's collusion with the Russians in the U.S. election is coming to haunt Pauline Hanson, Cory Bernardi, and Australia's alt-right, Ross Jones, reports. Let's take a look at this one. Australia's hard right is about to receive a serious, if not fatal, body blow. It hasn't been fatal to date, I guess. As we know, the entire Trump administration colluded with the Russian government to alter the course of the U.S. election. Of course, that now being called into question by 4 pages of fan fiction by William Barr. But for whatever reason, there seems to be a largely complicit press going along with this one. So they'll wag their finger at this, but we can make the excuse that, hey, we're just reading archival news reportage from April of 2017. It's not our fault that they were so deluded back then. During 2016, Russia waged intense cyber warfare against democratic forces in the United States. That's an interesting way of putting it. It's not capitalized D, so it's quite correctly phrased there. Waged warfare against democratic forces in the United States. Russia employed Bulgarian hackers, I had not heard that they were Bulgarian, by the score, and bots by the thousands to destroy not only Clinton and Sanders, interesting, but also Republican candidates like Bush and Rubio. Putin wanted only one man to win, Donald Trump, the one guy who could guarantee the unfettered expansion of the Russian kleptocracy. The links between the Trump mob and Putin are deep and becoming more complex by the day as revelation after revelation of Team Trump's collusion with the Russians to hijack the presidential race pour forth on a daily basis. California Congressman Eric Swalwell compiled this handy graphic, which isn't so handy for you because you can't see it, but suffice to say, it includes a picture of Vladimir Putin, a picture of Donald Trump, and lots of arrows pointing back and forth at one another, with a number of shady associates of Donald Trump included in smaller pictures. It is, as they say, and I don't know who says it, but I imagine it's Australians, dead set gnarly. That has to be an Australian saying that. And it's going to get much worse. Trump and his cronies are under investigation by the FBI. The Senate, it says the Senate Investigation Committee, but we assume that they mean the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Committee, although the latter might not go anywhere since its head, then, Republican Devin Nunes, has been accused by the likes of John McCain of conspiring to destroy the House investigation. The head of the Senate Investigative Committee, Democrat, and they got this wrong here too. This is one of those interesting features of reading other countries' coverage of American politics. Of all the dozens of things I probably got wrong about Australian politics over the years, and half a dozen just in the reading of the previous articles and not knowing what the various issues they were talking about meant. We have here the head of the Senate Investigation Committee, Democrat Adam Schiff, also weighed in. He is, of course, was then the ranking minority member of the House Intelligence Committee, not the Senate Investigation Committee, but okay. We have, the admonishment of John McCain saying that House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes destroyed the House's bipartisan investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Adam Schiff weighing in, according to the Washington Post, saying the top Democrat, well, he didn't say it, but they're talking about him. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee accused both the White House and the Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee of attempting to distract from the congressional investigation into whether Russia meddled in the election. And stronger words have been used since then, I'm sure. We have more in this article here. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn forced to resign his position as Trump's national security advisor for allegedly misleading the aforementioned Nunes over his contact with the Russians. Was that really? Did he mislead Nunes? I mean, it was Pence, but maybe Nunes as well. I don't know. Over his contact with the Russians. Turns out he was also working for Turkey, it says parenthetically. So Flynn was made a patsy and is now seeking immunity. According to the Wall Street Journal, Mike Flynn, President Donald Trump's former national security advisor, has told the FBI and congressional officials investigating the Trump campaign's potential ties to Russia that he is willing to be interviewed in exchange for a grant of immunity from prosecution, according to officials with knowledge of the matter. And according to the counsel to Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, retired, this quoted from Zero Hedge blog. Okay. General Flynn certainly has a story to tell, and he very much wants to tell it should the circumstances permit. People seeking immunity usually share two traits. They are guilty and they daub on people higher up. The only up for Flynn was Trump himself. Talk about rats in the ranks. But we have a few here as well. Pauline Hanson is on record as praising Putin. The Sydney Morning Herald reported, Asked about Mr. Putin on Channel 9, Senator Hansen praised the Russian president as a man standing up for his nation. I've got no problems with Vladimir, she said. I think the whole fact is, and I'm hearing from other people, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are strong leaders. You may not agree with what they do, but they are prepared to make a decision. Trump is not. And they have the country's best interests at heart. That, I doubt, is the case for either of them. That's what people want from leaders here in this nation, and I'm sure it's not. It certainly shouldn't be. Team Trump/Putin has taken a seat at the heart of one nation. The Financial Review reported the former Trump campaign economist, who is now the key economic advisor to Pauline Hanson's One Nation, has company tax cuts, desalination plants, and the Reserve Bank in his sights as the minor party ramps up its economic policies. By the way, who is that person that we're talking about? The former Trump campaign economist. Just thought I maybe would pop in there and see if we can figure out who that is. Darren Brady Nelson. Anybody ever heard of him? He's apparently an Australian-American dual citizen and a graduate of the Australian National University and University of New South Wales, working part-time as a freelancer for 2 months in Trump Tower on Donald Trump's presidential campaign when he was approached by One Nation. So, surely somebody who would be dismissed as a coffee boy should the crap hit the fan. And they might even be right in this case. All right. Well, thanks to Senator Malcolm Roberts, Pauline even cracked an invite to Trump's inauguration. How about that? And here embedded is a tweet from her. If you care to peek in on the craziness, she tweets as Pauline Hanson Oz, O-Z, all, well, you know how Twitter handles work, all one word. Would you believe it? I have been gifted tickets to the presidential inauguration ceremony of Donald Trump. What an honor, which she spells with a U because she's Australian. And that is a little bit odd, isn't it? In the end, Pauline didn't go. She claimed work commitments, but it's worth noting her chief of staff, James Ashby's previous criminal conviction might have made U.S. travel tricky, and Pauline hates flying alone. If Queensland Labour does not beat One Nation to a bloody pulp over Hanson's gushing love for the traitor Trump and his kleptocrat tyrant buddy Putin, they are in the wrong caper. These are the kind of rulers Pauline would have Australia live under. And if you think the Liberals are bad, let's not forget the beast. Cory Bernardi will be forever tainted by his stupid trucker's hat, firmly aligning him with Trump's version of populism. Lie, cheat, betray, bluster. He is shown to be a complete goose, all ideology and zero discernment. Well, I assume that hurts more in Australia, being a goose. And the Australian alt-right, their former Breitbart hero, Steve Bannon, is Trump's chief campaign strategist, and that is working out pretty well so far. He has given us a new equation, AR equals T, where AR equals alt-right and T equals traitors. It's not a great column, to be honest, but okay. So, as you follow the fortunes of Hanson, Bernardi, and the far right through 2017, remember one thing, the Russians are coming. All right. Well, you can follow Ross Jones on Twitter, too, if you care to do so, at RPZ Jones. Just thought I'd offer that to you. It's always entertaining to hear the Australian slang, at the very least. So it's certainly the opinion of some commentators in Australia that the connection is real. I don't know if there's anything more solid than that, but, Oh, let's check in here. This is just sort of, I don't know when this is going to give us what we're looking for here. Listening for whispers in the court of Putin. This is a piece from Axios, and from this year at that, February of 2019. Listening for whispers in the court of Putin. Russia watchers tend to believe it will be Russia's elites and not its people who eventually remove Vladimir Putin from power. Oh, what a thought. The big picture, you know how they frame things. The U.S. and Europe know Putin is not going to change his stripes. They've been deploying sanctions in an effort to increase the pressure on him, in part by deepening fissures within Russia's power structure. Yes, but the case of oligarch Oleg Deripaska shows there are limits to the costs the West is willing to absorb in the process. Next, zoom out. Where's One Nation appear in all of this? Can we skip down to that? This is, this is fascinating international connections, and I'm trying to see whether, well, for one thing, is this going to give us what we're looking for? And for another, can we make sense out of this entire piece? No, I don't think we can, and I don't think it actually makes mention of One Nation either. I'm not certain why the prominence in the search, but you know how these things sometimes work. But interesting article nonetheless. But we'll move on from there. Then, of course, leave it to Axios to finally be even less help than that crazy thing we just read in the Independent Australia. It was fun and worth doing. Let me just maybe click ahead one more page in the Google search results. Now more references to the NRA story. Meet the 20-year-old student who ran with One Nation in Western Australia. Okay, Al Jazeera story again. Well, nothing much more than the curious praise that Pauline Hanson heaps on Putin. And it's difficult to imagine, not knowing Australian politics very well, I can't comment on it for sure. I don't really know exactly what's going on, but it seems to me like there would be considerably less reason for Australian politicians to be so outspoken in their praise of Putin than even there would be here in the United States. I would guess we deal more directly in bilateral relations with Russia than the Australians do, just by virtue of their position geopolitically in the world. They could probably afford to have some distance between themselves, but I don't know, maybe not. Okay, let's see. Here's another story that I thought I might toss into the mix that I found very weird, and many of you likely have heard it as well. I just sort of thought I'd throw it in there because why not? Trump ally Jerry Falwell's Liberty University has Pentagon contracts, not out of keeping necessarily with the mission of universities around the country, but this particular contract that sparked this story seems ill-suited. It's not a research contract. Seems like, grift. Lachlan Markay wrote this piece. Subheader reads here, Falwell, remember he's of course in charge of Liberty University, Falwell has used Liberty-owned Freedom Aviation for personal, business, and political travel, and now it's selling jet fuel to the Pentagon. Not that unusual, the first part. That is to say, look, the Falwell family uses Liberty University as a personal piggy bank. We all kind of know that. That's sort of a rich person's game that they're playing with the plane as well. You, in your control of a corporate entity, whatever form the corporation takes, whether a nonprofit form, like I assume, maybe Liberty University isn't nonprofit. I don't know. But whether you're running a nonprofit or a private business, for-profit, whatever, if it has the assets to lease arguably dual-use lifestyle accoutrements like private jets, I need it for business. You see, I'm such I travel the world on behalf of, Liberty University or whatever the stupid thing is you're running, and you get the business to buy the plane and lease it to you or operate a separate leasing company for various financial reasons, tax purposes, also being able to make other people pay for the use of the plane but offering it to yourself for free, etc. Fairly common, and it's the way Trump handled his planes as well. But okay, so what they've done here is Liberty University owns a company called Freedom Aviation, and Freedom Aviation's job is to manage the personal jet that Jerry Falwell allows himself and I guess others to travel on for various reasons, personal, business, political travel, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, having a jet means you need to fill it with jet fuel, which occasionally means you need to purchase jet fuel from companies who are genuinely in the business of selling jet fuel. But I guess that also puts you in a position to grift off the government if you think you can get away with just about anything. Because now I've once bought jet fuel. I could certainly sell jet fuel as well. For instance, in vast quantities to the Pentagon, if the Pentagon were run by people who didn't care how much money they spent. And that is always the case anyway with the Pentagon, but under the Trump administration, perhaps doubly so. And they will have, of course, placed people in positions there who agree with and will help further the mission of making sure that the endless amounts of money spent everywhere, including the Pentagon, gets spent in ways that puts it in the pocket of Trump supporters. So let's take a look. Looks like the story has been updated to correct inaccurate information. So we'll only be giving you the accurate stuff, I guess, from now on. Just months after President Donald Trump took office, the federal government re-upped a contract to buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jet fuel from a university run by one of the president's top political supporters. What's interesting, of course, is they were re-upping this contract. So I guess, does that mean that they used to sell this all the time? I guess so. By the way, I guess we're bumping up against the end of the show, so we'll solve that problem by noting at this point that this is a members-only story that you have to, subscribe to the Daily Beast to be able to read the entirety of, but we'll read what we can. The Pentagon's energy procurement arm inked the deal worth nearly $900,000 with a company called Freedom Aviation on May 9th, 2017, and has purchased more than $400,000 in turbine fuel from the company since then. Freedom Aviation is wholly owned by Liberty University, a conservative school in Lynchburg, Virginia, led by high-profile Trump supporter Jerry Falwell Jr. It's just sort of an interesting business for him to be in. I never imagined that an evangelical Christian university president would be in the business of selling aviation fuel to the Pentagon, and maybe he never believed it either. But interestingly, I guess they have, what can I tell you? They've come to this conclusion that this makes sense. There's a link out to the description, the bare bones description of the deal from I guess one of the government contracting sites that's out there. So that doesn't tell us a great deal about it, but I guess the long and short of the deal is I buy aviation fuel all the time. Why Trump didn't, maybe he thought it was too direct a grift to hand the contract over to TAG Air or Trump Air Group, the company, the wholly owned subsidiary company the Trump organization uses to lease planes to itself. But I don't know. Jerry Falwell seems to be well in on the grift on this one. It seems like a piddling sideline, to be honest. I mean, it's $1 million, I guess, which is nice, and you take it where you can get it. But I don't know. It seems like he could be concentrating his attention elsewhere. But congratulations to him for finding a new way to grift off the government and grift off the Pentagon. I assume he's enjoying every bit of the extra million or whatever he clears off of this incredibly strange deal. I don't know how you come to thinking of it. Quite honestly, sometimes I am amazed by the vision, I guess the peripheral vision that these grifters have, that they can find these places where they can chisel out an extra $1 million from the government, which is kind of what we all feared about Trump taking over the government, of course, but for him, that was the point. I guess I almost admire their evil creativity in finding places to leverage $1 million or so at a time out of the federal government. It takes some seriously creative thought to think, well, I have a private jet. Why don't I? How does it even come to your attention that the Pentagon is looking for a new contractor to sell them jet fuel? Who even spends their time combing the Federal Register or contracting sites to find that stuff? I don't know. So I guess there's a certain amount of evil genius to it. Anyway, it's time for us to wrap up for the day and therefore for the week. When we come back on Monday, of course, it'll be April Fool's Day, everybody's favorite day online. In the meantime, real honest-to-God stories coming up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Let's give you the rundown. A nice short one here. Let's see if we can get to it all. Not everybody at Fox is joining the GOP celebration of the Barr memo. That's good news. And then, on the rest of the menu, a Wisconsin appeals court revived the controversial GOP lame duck laws. Oh, did it? That stripped power from every newly elected Democratic office holder. I thought they had scored a victory there, but the Wisconsin appeals court seems to have undone it. Matt Gaetz admitted he's just in Congress to protect Trump, and Trump-linked Christian fundamentalists are pouring dark money into Europe to boost the far right. So Europe becoming infected as well as Australia. A little bit more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ready for this stuff on the second half. A former NSA contractor portrayed as an eccentric hoarder by his lawyers pleaded guilty in one of the biggest breaches of U.S. secrets. And Facebook, them again, toughened its rules on political ads ahead of the EU vote. Those EU guys always thinking ahead, I guess. We'll be back next week.